So our final video for this week is looking at martyrdom, especially the martyrdom account of Perpetua and Felicitas. It's useful here to start with just understanding how the official Roman imperial policy operated towards Christians. Because Christians refused to offer sacrifices to the emperors, this is usually an offering of incense or grain that was burnt on an altar. Christians were seen as subverting the social system and the authority system itself. Thus, they're dangerous. They threaten the authority of the emperor by not doing the sacrifice. Christians could be charged with a variety of crimes for this, and the punishment varied a lot. It could be a fine, it could be seizure of property. Execution only happens if one repeatedly refuses to participate in sacrifice to the emperor, and in a judicial, that is a courtroom setting, before a judge, confesses faith in Jesus Christ. So it wasn't as if during a period of persecution, Roman soldiers ran to houses, dragged Christians out onto the street to the Colosseum, and then just killed them, right? It was a bureaucratic judicial process. Christians could be freed if they offered the prayers to the emperor, offered the sacrificial rites, and then they were let go. Everyone who participated in the emperor cult got a certificate of sacrifice. I've put onto Populi an image of one of those to get a sense of what it was like. Sometimes Christians bought one of these or procured counterfeit copies of them in order to skirt the law. So there were lots of ways for Christians to deal with martyrdom. They could go and hide. They could run out to the countryside. So there was a limited set of persecutions that actually resulted in death. Right? What's clear to the imperial system is that Christians have their own parallel social structure that we've seen in looking at the development of authority in the church, and they have their own unique ethical system. And that this brought in people from a long continuum of class, gender, age, and ethnicity. And by creating a parallel society in the Roman Empire, Christianity is also seen as dangerous. It's not just questioning the authority of the emperor, it's also this alternative social structure. And these two things make it very potently dangerous for Christians. Martyrdom is key to Christian self-identification in the 2nd and 3rd centuries. There was pervasive persecution and oppression of Christians, but relatively few martyrs. We probably have about 10,000 martyrs over a 300-year period out of a population of about 50 million in the Roman Empire. So we don't want overcount the number of martyrs, and yet it's still a significant number. 10,000 is still a lot of people. Christians don't come to admire the martyrs because of how many there are, but because of the kind of example they set. Tertullian, an early church theologian we'll look at more next week, says the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church. That is, the church grows out of the watering of the blood of the martyrs. And so early Christians take on this identification with the martyrs as part of this experience of being a persecuted community, even when they're not experiencing persecution at that moment in time. For the first 2 centuries of Christianity, there are sporadic persecutions. The first really significant persecution comes in the year 250 of the Common Era under Emperor Decius. That's when Christians really start to be compelled to conform to these imperial law codes. The other thing I want to just have you think about a little bit is the theology of martyrdom. And really that there's 2 key points here. One is that the martyr perfectly imitates Christ. Jesus said, if you want to be my disciple, take up your cross and follow me. That's what the martyr does perfectly. And so the Christian who's a martyr comes closer to God than anyone else by imitating the suffering of Jesus Christ. The second thing is the martyr comes to take on great power in the moment of death and persecution. The Spirit of Jesus Christ himself enters into the martyr, so the martyr becomes almost like a second Christ, showing forth Christ himself to the world by reenacting the suffering death of Jesus. Very powerful moment. So martyrdom, you can see then how it sits right at the core of Christian self-identification then. All right, let's turn to the text of the martyrdom of Perpetua and Felicitas itself. This document is based on a diary that Perpetua kept. She is a young mother. She's of noble ancestry. She lives in the city of Carthage, which is in North Africa, around the year 202, where there's a local persecution happening. What I find really fascinating about this text is it shows how following Christianity made belonging to ordinary Roman society not possible, right? There's a disruption between your Christian identification and your Roman identification. A great example of this is when Perpetua's father comes to visit her in prison. This is on page 31 of Coakley and Sterk. Chapter 1, the bottom, paragraph number 2. While, says she, the text begins, we were still with the persecutors, and my father, for the sake of his affection for me, was persistent in seeking to turn me away and to cast me down from the faith. So her father comes into the prison and says, just do the sacrifice and save your life. Perpetua does this. She says, Father, do you see, let's say, this vessel lying here to be a little pitcher or something else? So she's probably gesturing to a water jug or something in the corner of the room. Do you see this? Can we call this anything but what it is? And he said, I see it to be so. I replied to him, can it be called by any other name than what it is? And he said, no. And she replies, neither can I call myself anything else than what I am, a Christian. She says, just as that jug can't be called anything than what it is, I am a Christian. Then my father, provoked at this, saying, threw himself upon me as if he would tear my eyes out. But he only distressed me and went away overcome by the devil's arguments. Wow, there is a lot happening here. First, what Perpetua is saying is, I am no longer your daughter. I am no longer your mother. I am first and foremost a Christian. This is radical because Roman society said, what you are the most, Perpetua, is the daughter to your father and the mother to your child. That's where your identity rests. And she says, no, my identity rests in being a Christian. When she says, I am a Christian, she is saying Christianus sum, which is like the legal statement in the court transcripts that are referenced above, the judicial process, that would have triggered the judge to denounce this person as a Christian and to send them to their death. So her dramatic moment of identity also disrupts her relationship with her father. And so her gender identification melts away as she moves closer and closer to identifying with Jesus Christ. We see this also in the gladiatorial combat that's on page 33 and 34 of Coakley and Sterk. Perpetua is a visionary. She has these dreams, and in one of these dreams, she is being prepared for combat in the arena. She looks down and she says, it looks as if I've become a man. This gender inversion continues, right? And she fights a gigantic figure, the Egyptian. In gladiatorial combat, the Egyptian was like the great foe in the arena that often gladiators had to overcome. And she wins out over the foe. And in the text, it says towards the end on page 34 that as she finishes fighting the Egyptian, and her trainer, she draws near to him, and he took the branch of victory that she had won, which is a gladiatorial symbol. And she says, and he kissed me and said to me, "Daughter, peace be with you." And I began to go gloriously to the Son of Bavarian gate. That is the gate of victory that the winning gladiator would pass through. So the trainer is like God saying, I will be with you, I'm going to support you, and you're going to be victorious. But again, her identity as mother and daughter is melting away into just being purely and fully a follower of Jesus. Even the way in which Perpetua dies says something about how she is overcoming gender limitations and showing forth her true identity. I have a picture up for you taken of the ancient ruins of the arena in Carthage, which is most likely where Perpetua met her death. I hope you can take a look at that and reflect on it a little bit. Let's look at the end, though. This is on page 37, where it talks about her ending and her death. So many of her companions have died, and now an editor who finished the text is taking over here. On the very bottom of the left-hand column on 37. So it says, "The rest indeed, immovable and in silence, received the sword thrust." Those who have survived all the fighting with the animals are being killed off by the executioners in the arena. Much more Satyrus, one of her companions, who also had first ascended the ladder and first gave his spirit, for he also was waiting for Perpetua. But Perpetua, that she might taste some pain, being pierced between the ribs, cried loudly, and she placed the wavering right hand of the youthful gladiator to her throat. So, the way in which you were executed in the Roman world was that a sword thrust would go in between your collarbone, down into your aorta, and kill you. Sorry, it's a little gruesome. It sounds as if the one executing her missed and hits her ribs instead. And so it says, she herself placed the wavering right hand of the youthful gladiator to her throat. So she stabbed and then redirects the sword thrust so she dies. Possibly such a woman could not have been slain unless she herself had willed it, because she was feared by the impure spirits. This is not Perpetua committing suicide. Rather, this is Perpetua asserting control at the moment of her death. This was a real ideal in the ancient Roman world, that the way in which you transformed a shameful death into a noble death was by being in control of it at the moment. This also then shows forth her virtue, her manliness, as it were. It also speaks to Christian ideals of, say, Paul's kenosis hymn in Philippians 2, that true power is found when one empties oneself out for God's glory. So there is a lot happening here. We see then that this account of her martyrdom is profoundly subversive. It shows how marginalized people can assert their own faith to emerge as leaders of their communities in ways that the surrounding society generally would not have permitted. So that ends our reflections in the video for this week. I have a VoiceThread question for you, and then there's also some things to do in Google Documents as well. I'm looking forward to our conversations.